Thank you for joining us for the final disposition options class in our spring 2021 community education series. I am Dara Ray and I am the president of Learn. We also have on the phone Dee Childers, vice president and community education chair. And we are pleased to welcome Danette Arnson from Accent Funeral Home as our educator for today.
Hi, everybody. Welcome.
So thank you, Danette, for joining us. A couple of things I'd like to share with you. Learn is an Idaho-based nonprofit organization with a mission to provide quality community education on retirement and aging-related topics in the area of health, wealth, lifestyle, and caregiving. And we want to bring this to the community free of charge and easily accessible. We're a leaders network of the Society of Certified Senior Advisors, which is an organization that has standards for quality and compliance that we adhere to in order to make sure that you're receiving quality education from quality educators. That being said, we do want to remind you that this content is being provided to you for general informational purposes only, is not to be considered legal, financial, or health advice. We have to just always say this. So we make sure that you take this information as a way to inform yourself for those very important conversations with your advisors. And we do recommend that you consult with your advisors before taking action personally on any information that would impact you. And I would like to say thank you and welcome to Dee Childers from Life Changes Elder Care. So not only is Dee our host for today and the chair of the Community Education Committee, but she is also the sponsor for our spring series and believes so much in Learn that she wanted to make sure that we launched this great program and brought it to you. Life Changes Elder Care are geriatric care managers, family care managers, and essentially she describes herself and her team as the hired daughter. When you need someone to step in with knowledge and expertise and advice, Dee and her team are there to help you navigate the challenges of care and support the people you love. And Danette is with us today from Accent Funeral Home. And I'm going to make one more request. I don't think I can mute people from here, but if everybody could try to mute your microphone, that would be great. And Danette, I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and Accent Funeral Home.
Well, thank you for asking me to speak today. My name is Danette Arnson. I'm with Accent Funeral Home in Meridian, and I have been in funeral service since the mid-90s. Been in Boise, Meridian area since 1997. Today, I want to just, give information about disposition, different options, general information. I want to ask if all of you have had the talk, meaning have you had the talk with your family members about, when you pass away, what needs to be done, what you want done? Do you have thoughts? Because when there's a death and arrangements have not been made, it is so stressful for, the surviving family members to deal with all of that. And when you have made some decisions, on your own, it is so incredibly helpful to the people that will be taking care of your arrangements. Different types of decisions. Do you want to be buried in a casket? Do you want to be cremated? I might also just say, if you have a question, we will have time for questions at the end. You can jot that down and I'd be happy to answer any questions at the end. So just make note of those. But in terms of disposition, there's casket burial, there's cremation. Sometimes people think, with cremation, it's just cremation. But you can also have a service. And I think that's important for people to know. And with casket burial, do you want to have a church service, a service at the funeral home? Do you want to have a viewing for your friends and family? What cemetery would you like to be buried at? So there are so many questions that are asked of families when there's been a death, that it is so helpful again when the decedent has made some of these decisions on their own. So in terms of type of services, there is a traditional service, which is what we would call when somebody has a visitation, a church or a chapel service, and a graveside service following, and the burial is in a casket. There's also those that maybe just want to have services only at the cemetery, not a chapel service to, precede that. There's cremation. You can have a traditional service. Again, that traditional meaning there's a visitation, a church service or a chapel service, and then cremation can follow. And the cremated remains can be returned to the family. They can be still buried at a cemetery and memorialized that way. Or you can have, the cremation takes place and then the cremated remains are at the memorial service. Again, that service can be held as a formal church. It can be held at a funeral home, maybe at a graveside service, or a park, or a senior center. We've had memorial services in all types of venues. There's also direct cremation, meaning there's not a service, there's not a viewing. And when I say not a service, that might be a service that the funeral home is involved with. Your family may plan a service on their own. You can also have a cremation with a viewing, and then the cremation to follow that. So it many times is very important for friends and family to be able to have that opportunity to see their loved one. Many times the visitation at the funeral home might be a much more peaceful setting than the way they saw their loved one last, depending on how the death occurred. So those are all, many different options that can happen. We would also ask, if there's a cemetery, do you have a choice? There's cemeteries all over the valley. You can have the remains in terms of cremation buried in the ground. There is above ground placement in a columbarium wall. Or maybe it's the wish of the family, or it was the wish of the decedent to have cremated remains scattered at a favorite, maybe camping spot or whatnot. When I meet with a family and they're planning a service, we would discuss what is to be done at the service. Did maybe the decedent had left some notes and they wanted, a certain niece to give a eulogy, or, someone in particular to maybe read a poem or a scripture reading at the service, or they very well may have favorite songs that they want to have played. So when I meet with families and make arrangements before a death has occurred, I like to ask people that so we can write those notes down, and then that information is there and would be so useful when a death does happen down the road. Also, it's, I think, important for people to think about an obituary. We had a little lady here in Meridian that she died when she was, well into her 90s. I want to say she was 99 when she passed. And for probably 12 years prior, she would come in the week of her birthday and bring us a new obituary. She would update her grandchildren, great-grandchildren. I think she even had great-greats. And I bet there was a stack half an inch thick of obituaries that she brought in. And she was just wanted everything to be prepared. And after she passed, in the next year when her birthday rolled around, it was sad not to have her come in again and update that obituary. We had gotten used to seeing her, but she knew exactly what she wanted in that obituary. She provided that to us. She brought us updated pictures as she had new pictures taken, and let us know what paper she wanted that to be in. The other thing that is important, and I'm going to show you a document here. This is one that it mentioned will be saved on the website. It's the vital statistic form. This form helps collect the information that's needed for the death certificate. I would say one of the most, one of the items that families have to call me back on is information needed for the death certificate. So we need to have the parents' names of the decedent with the mother's maiden name and the state or foreign country that those parents were born in. And that is probably the top item that families have to check on if the decedent hadn't provided that for the family or for the already at the funeral home. We would also ask the family how many certified copies of the death certificate are needed. People ask me what's an average, and really no average, different for everyone, depending on, you know, how many life insurance policies you have, perhaps how many investment accounts, maybe they're with numerous companies, bank accounts, property that is owned. So it's generally places you're requesting monies from are an organization that needs a certified copy of the death certificate. I have noticed probably in the last year or so that some insurance companies are now accepting just a photocopy of that certified copy. So a lot of times I hear, well, you need probably 20 death certificates. And I would just say that is a whole bunch of them, and you probably don't need, you know, that many. But it's in one of the other items that they have on the website here at learn.org is the planning guide. And there is a spot in there where you can write down different insurances you may have, investments, and that would help your family members determine how many certified copies of the death certificate are needed. We talked a little bit about cemeteries, but I would like to kind of just touch on that a little more. There is a Catholic cemetery in Mount Calvary in Napa. I have people ask about that. Also, the Idaho State Veterans Cemetery. And the Idaho State Veterans Cemetery, anyone who is a honorably discharged veteran is eligible to be buried at the cemetery. For the veteran themselves, there is no cost. For the spouse of a veteran, the current spouse fee is $807. And the burial up there and the fee is whether it's a casket burial or an urn being placed in the ground burial. They do have the above ground structure, which is called a columbarium. And that structure has individual niches, and each niche holds 2 urns. So say for the veteran and for the spouse. If by chance both spouses are veterans, they can then have a space side by side rather than sharing one. And that's a choice of the family, how they would like that to be done. You can pre-register at the Veterans Cemetery by providing the discharge papers for the veteran, and then the marriage certificate is needed for the spouse to register the spouse. They don't guarantee a particular space because how it works at the Veterans Cemetery is it's in consecutive order. So you don't go out and pick your certain spot. It's just the one next in line, determining when you have your service, the next one there. There's city cemeteries, there's Morris Hill Cemetery, Meridian Cemetery, if you live in the Meridian taxing district. And I know Star Cemetery is the same way. Middleton, it's a lesser amount if you're in that tax district. So depending on what cemetery that you're looking at, And then there's other, privately owned cemeteries in the valley also. Many times I hear from families, there's been a death and the children come in and say, Dad had everything taken care of. Well, as we get to looking, the only thing Dad had done is purchase the cemetery plot. So they many times will think that just takes care of everything there, and that's not always the case, or is not the case. And then want to touch on at the Veterans Cemetery that the VA does not pay for funeral expenses. They do cover the cost of the, for the cemetery and the marker, but in terms of the funeral home expenses and the casket and such, that's not covered by the VA. If the veteran was possibly receiving a disability pension, there is some additional monies that are paid, but they don't cover everything 100%. And I think that's kind of a misconception. I hear people say, well, Dad was a veteran and they are going to, take care of everything. And unfortunately, not the case there. There are so many ways in terms of memorialization and what can be done with, especially with cremation becoming more popular. I've had families, purchase a bench, and sometimes the bench can even have some of the cremated remains. The way they're constructed can hold some of the remains, or they just have a memorial bench. I know when Dee and I spoke the other day, she just wanted me to touch on some of the other, options that are available. And we are able to digitally take the thumbprint of a decedent, and there's keepsake jewelry that can be ordered. That is a nice way to memorialize. There is jewelry that can hold, a lock of hair or cremated remains. Blown glass, where some of the cremated remains are infused into that glass. You can have a tree planted, and the cremated remains are planted in the base of the tree, and is there, it disperses into the soil as the tree grows. There's even a company that will take some of the cremated remains, and it is compressed into a diamond. And I've seen it at a trade show, and then also have had a family that has done that, and absolutely gorgeous. And you wouldn't know the difference between something from the jeweler and what came from that company. So there's so many different options out there of what can be done to memorialize a loved one, and even in terms of having services and celebrations of life, many, many, many options. I would like to talk about prearranging for your services, and you might be wondering, well, how do we do that? What's the best step? It can be done, go into a funeral home and talk to them, and it may be just getting your thoughts down on paper and creating a file with the funeral home, or to take it another step is to plan ahead and prepay for that. When we help a family that wants to prepay for funeral services ahead of time, the money is placed in an insurance policy. So the decedent, at the time of the passing, the decedent would have been the policy holder, and the funeral home is the beneficiary. And so the money is paid directly to the funeral home at that time. The insurance policy is a very secure and safe way to prepay for arrangements, because the money can't be accessed until the insured passes away. Insurance is also transferable. So if you live here in the Treasure Valley now, but you end up moving to Florida, the policy just transfers to the funeral home in Florida that would take care of the arrangements at that time. It also locks in the price. At least that's how we do it here at Accent Funeral Home, is We guarantee any of our service fees, and we guarantee any of the merchandise. So if you prepay for your service now and it's 20 years down the road when a death occurs, it's going to be locked in at the price you paid now in 2021. It also protects the monies in that policy from Medicaid. So if you are, say, in a long-term nursing care facility and your personal funds are becoming depleted, you may be told you want to prepay this before you qualify for Medicaid. The policy at that point is made irrevocably assigned to the funeral home. That is telling Medicaid that that money can only be used at the time of your death for funeral and or cremation services. So it holds the money securely, and it's there to be used at the time of death. It used to be very common that funeral homes would use a funeral trust. That's when the money was paid directly to the funeral home, written out right to the funeral home, placed in the person's name in a trust account. We do not do that as it is not a safe way to hold funds. About 20 years ago, there was a funeral home here in Boise that got into some trouble, went out of business, and the trust monies had all been spent. I met with a lady, actually met her at a caregiver seminar when I first met Dee, and she was telling me that she had received, been reimbursed. I can't, now the word has escaped me, but she was reimbursed for the monies that were taken, and it was $10,000 that she had put into that trust. Her mom was to be buried in Montana, and I think she got like $3.54 back is what she had gotten back. So with the funeral insurance, the money would always be there at the time of death. It cannot be spent, cannot be accessed until the time of death. So very safe and secure. It also allows the person who's making the arrangements, who is the insured, if you are choosing a cremation service, you can sign your own cremation authorization. That alleviates your surviving family members from doing that. Many times a death occurs and it was the wishes of the decedent to be cremated. They have not made their own arrangements. They don't have a spouse. Maybe they don't have children. And then we're looking to say, okay, who can sign this document? If somebody has durable power of attorney for healthcare, that does not cease upon death. It does continue and allows the person designated in that document to sign for cremation. So they would be first and foremost, even in front of a spouse. So I always like to say, make sure the person you give that designation to, they know what your wishes are, so they would know how you want to proceed. I met with a family once that the gentleman passed away and his ex-wife had the durable power of attorney for healthcare. He had a new wife, but it was the previous wife who was in charge. She was the one who could say whether he's buried in a casket or he's cremated. And luckily she chose to play nice with everybody else and went with the current wife's wishes. But that was something he hadn't even thought about changing in his paperwork. So if you do have that, something good to think about there. If you have 7 children and no spouse, no durable power of attorney for healthcare, we're going to need a majority of your surviving children. So we would need 4 of those 7 to all come together and, agree and sign that document. It is something that can be sent by email. So if you have family members that live out of the area, we can absolutely work with them by email, by fax, by DocuSign. So it can be done that way. But it is one of those items that when arrangements are paid ahead of time, you can sign your own. So that's just one more thing that is done and taken care of. In Idaho, when someone has made their own pre-arrangements, we as the funeral home, as funeral directors, have to follow those arrangements. So if you set up arrangements and you know that you want a church service and a viewing and you want to be buried at the cemetery, but at the time of your death, maybe your surviving family say, oh, mom changed her mind. She wanted to be cremated and we're scattering her in the Owyhee Mountains. We can't do that. We have to honor the wishes of the decedent. So it's called the right to die law. And it makes sure that the wishes of the decedent are followed in the way in which they want them. Sometimes when I meet with families, the person I'm meeting with might say, well, I don't really want a viewing right now, but can the kids decide that at the time? Absolutely. We'll just make a note of that and just say, children to decide upon whatever those points may be that they were leaving up to them. But we do have to honor the wishes. It's very easy to do the prepaid insurance policy. We would meet with the person, fill out the application. There are some health questions depending on how those are answered. It may be a policy that if you've had some health issues within the last 2 years, then it is not a guaranteed issue right off. It just says there'd be a limited death benefit within the first couple of years, 2 years. If you would answer no to the health questions, meaning you've had no health problems, then it's a guaranteed issue and it's issued right then. The amount of the policy can be paid in full, or if payment options are needed, there's that option also. And again, if you're, move out of the area, those arrangements and insurance can absolutely move to another funeral home. With the large influx of people moving into our valley here, we're seeing many times a week people coming in and saying, I purchased this in another state, can we transfer it? And absolutely, we can do that. Taking care of your arrangements and prepaying it gives such a peace of mind to the person doing their own arrangements, but to the surviving family members knowing that they're done and nothing needs to be decisions made. I mean, there will be some decisions that would need to be made at that time, but the majority of them would have already been visited about and notes made on that. Maybe you already have a life insurance policy. That can be assigned, irrevocably assigned to the funeral home. So you don't have to purchase a new policy. And that would be assigned to the funeral home. The monies would be used in the policy towards what the arrangements were chosen. And that can be done. It's very easy with just some paperwork that's requested from the insurance company, and we could sure help, or any director help with that. There's one thing that we talked about, health questions, but there is not a physical that's required for this type of an insurance policy. If a death occurs and there have not been any arrangements made, we have to, work with the family, and they determine, who will pay for the funeral, cremation, cemetery expenses. And a lot of times I hear, well, mom or dad has plenty of money in the bank and we just need a death certificate and then they'll release the funds to us. And that is not always the way that it is. It depends on how that bank account is set up. Is it payable upon death? And death certificates right now are taking about 3 weeks. A year ago, I would have told you we can have them in 5 days. Now, from the time that we order them, which is many times, 5 or so days after a death occurs, it's taking up to 2 weeks, if not a little bit longer, to get death certificates. Just due to so many of the staff that are working from home and have slowed down that process. I hear from families and from people that I meet with that, we have a financial power of attorney, they will take care of everything. Well, financial power of attorney ceases upon death and is no longer valid after the person passes away, which then, they would not have immediate access to funds. It is very common, funeral homes to be paid prior to services. Can do an insurance assignment with an existing life insurance policy, but we need the beneficiary to sign off on that. If you've listed, all of your children, maybe you've got 4 children and they're equally 25% beneficiaries, we need all 4 of those children and the beneficiaries to sign off on that. It can be done. It's just some paperwork that we would work through with the family at that time. Most companies do allow that assignment. And we generally do not wait for estates to be settled, as that can take months and months to be done, depending on the situation for that particular family. It's always different depending on what the decedent had already in place. So again, the insurance is an easy way to do it, 100% transferable. If you move out of the area or you would set it up with one funeral home and decide you want to work with another, can always be transferred. If you already have made some funeral arrangements and it has been, quite a while, I encourage you to go in and talk to the funeral home and just maybe revisit your plan, make sure everything is how you would like it and you don't want to make any changes. Sometimes information needs to be updated. So if you do have something in place, it's not a bad idea to just look that over, and the funeral home would be more than happy to sit down with you on that. No one gets out of dying. It's going to happen to all of us. And it is a gift, absolutely, that's given to surviving family members when arrangements are made ahead of time. Especially if you're a single person and you don't have a spouse or children, very, very important to have some plans put in place. Because it's sometimes has to go to the court system for them to decide who will sign for cremation if you don't have your arrangements, made ahead of time. I encourage you to have the talk with your family and sit down and let them know. I have many times met with people, they've made their pre-need arrangements, and I give them a card that says, Mrs. Smith has made these arrangements, and they go, I encourage them to give them to their children. Well, we don't want our children to know about it. I said, well, you got to let the person who will be taking care of your arrangements at that time know, so they would know who to contact. And it is truly a gift that you give them when you made these arrangements yourself. They're not doing it at a highly emotional time. We also find that people spend less on a funeral when they're doing it themselves than when their family is doing it at that time. So just another thought there. I might at this time ask if there's anybody who has any questions that I can answer for you. And everybody's on mute, it looks like. So if you do have a question.
So Danette,
Yes.
I'll ask a question. For the transfer of insurance policies from other locations, how does the that work if the prices are different from here in Boise relative to where they purchased their insurance?
Yes,
How does
yeah, good question. So depending on, many times when people come in, we will honor the other funeral homes prices. I mean, we have to kind of look at that on a case by case basis. If the prices vary and say it would be more expensive in Idaho, then money can always be added on, or a new policy can be purchased to cover the difference in cost. If there's excess monies, those can be refunded to the family at the time of death. We can't take the money out of a policy ahead of time before death occurs. Just yesterday, we had a family come in that wanted to transfer policies from a funeral home in California, and they each had a $10,000 policy. Well, our prices here were not even close to that. So, at the time of their passing, there will be excess monies that can be refunded or can be used towards other arrangements and so forth. Yeah, good question. Anybody else?
Hi, this is Brenda. I have a question.
Hi.
You know, Kathy, are there any laws, do you know, in the state of Idaho as far as spreading ashes? Can you just spread people's ashes whatever you want?
Well, probably not. I know if you were in your backyard, yes, you can do that. Now you probably can't go to a city park and just do it. Someone's going to frown upon that. I believe through the Forest Service, you can get a permit to do so. I probably know nobody who has ever gotten a permit to do it. I think it's something that people do and are just discreet about it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
So Danette, we had talked, because you've helped me with both of my parents.
Yes.
And could you talk a little bit about transferring the remains across state lines?
Yes. So are you speaking for cremation?
Well,
Or
probably either cremation or burial.
Yeah. So for cremation, you can absolutely, no problem, transfer cremated remains from one state to another. When you travel by air, there would be the urn could not be, if it's going through TSA and through the checkpoint, it can't be metal. It needs to be something that can go through the X-ray. When people are traveling by air, we would direct them on that and help them choose something that would work. I do not recommend putting cremated remains in checked baggage, just in case the luggage were to get lost. I would hate to hear about that. But we also would provide a family with a letter for TSA, the Transportation Safety Administration, just letting them know that this person is traveling with the cremated remains of, and they're on their way to Florida or wherever that may be. With the influx of people moving from California, but they own burial spaces, say, still in California, we're making more and more arrangements all the time to send decedents back to California. And that can be done on the airlines. It can be done, gosh, if you've got a van or a pickup with a camper topper and you want to take them, you can do that also. You just need the proper permits from the state. And the funeral home would help you in doing that. It's called a burial transit permit. It is part of the death certificate. So yeah, it's done all the time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions?
I've heard about a green burial option in Idaho. What does that mean, and what are, as we're thinking about being more ecological or good to the environment, what is the recommendation for disposition from an environmental perspective?
I probably don't know exactly what their recommendation would be. I know in the Treasure Valley area, there is not a green cemetery. That usually means a cemetery that does not require a casket. The decedent could be wrapped in a shroud or maybe in a container constructed of wicker. I've seen that, and is placed directly in the soil. There was a cemetery, don't quote me, but I want to say it was like Salmon or Chalice or somewhere over that way, that, but it, I believe, is no longer operating. I think in the Seattle area is probably going to be the closest to us here in the Treasure Valley. But green burial generally means no outer burial container. Cemeteries in the valley here, most cemeteries require an outer burial container for the casket to be placed in. And so at a green cemetery, that would not be required. Yeah.
And from an environmental perspective, is there, which, burial versus cremation, is there a big impact on our earth between one or the other? Is there a recommendation in your industry for those reasons?
Not that I can probably speak to directly. I hear, people are worried about casket burial and we're going to run out of space and that being a concern. I had a family just last week asked me about their loved one had many fillings and that those needed to be removed because it causes pollution into the air. And I said, that is just not something I have ever heard of. We do not remove fillings. We don't remove gold teeth. So after they left, I did a little Google search. Sure enough, there's something out there saying that, there's harmful chemicals that are being released into the air. Now, is that true? I don't know. It was on Google. You can't believe everything on Google. So I did not take enough time to really research that, but that's the first I had ever heard of that. And it was out there. So, and it was what they were saying, but whether there's any, I have not seen any trade articles, magazines that have come out talking to us about that directly with that. So
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Elaine, I thought you were writing down some notes. Did you have a question? And you're on mute. We can't hear you. You're on mute.
Said no, but I'm learning a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I did want to apologize. I have a son-in-law here who has a traumatic brain injury, so I'm really sensitive about keeping it on mute.
Okay.
He has outbursts every now and then.
Is there anyone else who has a question?
Well, Danette, do you see anything kind of on the forefront relative to changes or additional options in the way of end of life, either ceremony? So one, ceremony, what have you seen with people not being comfortable getting together or traveling during the pandemic? And two,
Sure.
What about the future and new ideas or approaches? What do you see?
Sure. So in the last year, we had to recreate the wheel a little bit in terms of helping families and having services. We did more online type arrangements, Zoom meetings, family meetings, just as we all are doing today. I saw a lot of churches that started streaming their services, and we offer a streaming option also called TributeCast that has really been wonderful for family members who were not comfortable traveling or just leaving their home and being with a group of people. So I actually think that's been a couple of really good things that have come out of this COVID pandemic is the option to stream services and give family members who are not able to travel that opportunity. I think maybe I know what you're talking about, Dee, a little bit. We spoke There in Washington state, they have a new form of disposition. So in Idaho, there's two forms of disposition. There's cremation and there is full body, burial in a casket. In Washington, there is, and I don't know a lot about it, but there is an option for composting. And the decedent is placed in some sort of material, and I don't know the details as to how long it takes, the process takes. But yeah, the posted into a material that is then returned to the family. There is another form of disposition that is not in Idaho yet, but I know Oregon has it. It's called alkaline hydrolysis. And it is very similar to a cremation process in terms of the end result is the same, but the decedent is placed in a liquid solution. And after the process is completed, what remains is the bone structure of the decedent, and that is taken and processed into a finer particulate, like cremated remains are. So I have not heard of anything through like our state association for funeral directors proposing or passing a law for the new forms of disposition, but I'm sure at some point it will make its way this way. Yeah.
So does the state legislature have to approve new forms?
They do. Yep, it goes through the
Okay.
legislature. Mhm.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know at one point, Randy and I had been at a convention and we were learning about the alkaline hydrolysis and really interested in looking into that. But then finding out it hadn't passed through the legislature, and so we decided not to pursue that. But yeah, I'm sure at some point it will. And there are proponents of that type of disposition that say, you don't have maybe any problem with the air quality and that you would with cremation. But if a crematory is working correctly and properly, there is not a pollution problem. Yeah.
Oh, that's helpful because I have heard that a number of times that there's particulates put into the atmosphere with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one thing I didn't mention is about embalming. We don't have to embalm everybody who passes away. Even if there's to be a viewing, if it's for immediate family and it's within a day or so of someone passing away, we don't have to have embalming. Now, if you're having a public viewing, then that's something that we would recommend, but the law states that we have to refrigerate or embalm within 24 hours of somebody passing away. So it's not something that has to be done for every decedent.
And I think from my experience, that's one of the things that's very important for people to understand, that just because someone passes doesn't mean that you have to be called immediately and the body whisked away.
No.
That people have the right to sit in silence or however they want to with the body for, it sounds like, up to 24 hours.
Yeah. And depending on, the situation, somebody dies at a hospital, the hospital may not wanting you to stay there for 24 hours. But I've been contacted by many hospice organizations that, we're just calling to let you know that Mrs. So-and-so has passed away, but her family wants to remain with her for X amount of time. They'd like you to come tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. or whatever that situation may be. That brings up something else that I did not mention is, what do you do if you have somebody who passes away unexpectedly? So if you wake up and say your spouse has died in the night, if hospice is not helping with their care, then the coroner in the county in which you reside needs to be contacted. That can be done by calling the funeral home directly, and they reach out to the coroner's office, or the coroner can be called directly to from the family. If someone is under hospice care, then when the patient passes, the hospice would be notified. They send a nurse out. The nurse makes the pronouncement of death, and then the nurse will call the funeral home at the time when family is ready to do so. At a hospital, most often the coroner is not involved. Now, if the decedent had not been in the hospital, if the decedent had been in the hospital for less than 24 hours, or they had some sort of an accident, a motor vehicle accident, or they took a fall at home and that's what has led up to their passing, the coroner would need to be notified in that situation. But just because the coroner is involved, that doesn't mean that they always take the decedent, they do an autopsy. They'll do an inspection and or an investigation prior to, releasing to the funeral home. So.
And what about organ donation? Is that, can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So organ donation, if you have on your driver's license that you are an organ donor, but you pass away at home, you would not be eligible for donation of, say your heart, your lungs, your kidney, your organs. You may still be eligible for tissue donation. The difference between organ and tissue donation is the tissue may be bones, skin, and that is something that can be done after there is a time window. I'm sorry, I don't have that right off the top of my head, but it is something that could still happen, or like the Lions Eye Bank can still do the eye donation. If somebody passes at the hospital, they have coordinators at the hospital that would talk to the family and tell them about organ donation and the importance of it, and talk to them if their loved one would be a candidate. Not everybody is. It's going to depend on what they died from. They have criteria that has to be met on that. You can still have a full service and a viewing after organ donation and tissue donation. There's also whole body anatomical donation, say to a medical school or different groups that use the whole body for scientific purposes. Like maybe say they use the decedent to practice and use a new treatment for like a hysterectomy or a procedure. The whole body donation used for that. So
is there a whole body donation program in Idaho?
Not in, well, there is at ISU in Pocatello, but they only take, so many every year or every other year. So, and they're probably have a stricter criteria of the decedent. I know you can't have any like a bed sore, any open sores. It's going to depend on what the person passed away from. There is a company out of Portland called BioGift that they do the whole body donation. They're the ones that it's for medical purposes. Like I know one time they were needing a certain number of female decedents because they were going to be having a class on a new procedure and technique for a hysterectomy, or it might be something new with a joint replacement or something like that. I believe with BioGift, it's within about 2 years that the 2 months that the cremated remains come back to the family. Where if you are doing an anatomical donation to a medical school, it can be years down the road before the cremated remains come back to the family.
And do those donations work for people in Idaho? Do they take donations from Idaho, or is
they do? Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. I have recently had a skiing accident and I broke my leg and had to have a donor bone put in during the surgery. And so I have a whole new appreciation for tissue donation and the importance of it. And it was kind of neat. They sent a little card that I could fill out and send back to the family of that decedent, and tell them I could give them my name if I wanted, or just a letter of thanks. So yeah.
Wow. So that's an interesting piece, because I think that's a bit of a misnomer that many of us assume that if we've got that little dot on our driver's license check, that we will be a donor, but you really, you're only a donor in specific circumstances, it sounds like.
Correct. And especially for organ donation, heart, lungs, so forth. When the death occurs at the hospital, the decedent would then be placed on support to keep the blood pumping through and the oxygen and such, until the team can be assembled to do the actual retrieval of those organs and for placement in another. Yeah.
So it's interesting, because I have clients that say they want organ donation, and one that's even moved and from another state and said that, I think it's Oregon OSU or somebody has accepted them as a whole body donor. So it's kind of like, I don't know anything about that really in terms of what one should do, but what would be a good first step?
Yeah, to contact like OHSU, ISU. You can fill out paperwork at the needed time. It doesn't mean that you will be accepted at the time of your death. I here a few years ago met with a woman. She was in a care center, and she, I wish I could remember the state. Have you heard of the body farm? I wish I could Google it right now, but it's like where they might put a decedent out in the woods and do a study on how fast it takes for them to decompose and different changes to happen. And that's what her wish was. And so she had it pre-registered. I followed up with them just to gain some more information on it. And there is such a place. I've read probably most of the Patricia Cornwell books, and she talks about the body farm in hers. I always thought it was something made up, but apparently not.
It's real, huh?
It's real, but you can contact different places and get pre-registered and complete their paperwork. Again, it doesn't absolutely guarantee that it can be done at the time, but it's a good first step.
And so in that case, is the first call then to them, or is it still to a funeral home and you would help coordinate that?
I would say it could happen either way. We many times help coordinate that. We have been the contemporary for BioGift out of Portland, and we used to drive the decedent to Portland. And now, gosh, it's been a year since we've had any contact with them because they kind of closed down during COVID. We had somebody pass yesterday and somebody passed today who will be a BioGift donation. So they are back open, but they've changed their procedure. They now send somebody to the place of death, to the mortuary, to pick up the decedent, because that way they're limiting the people into their facility. Yeah.
And what about autopsies? Can a family request an autopsy? So both my parents died of a type of dementia, two different ones. And in retrospect, I wish I would have thought about that ahead of time, because I really would like to know, was it really what the diagnosis was?
What they said, yes. It can be requested. Both of your folks were on hospice, so the hospice doctor would not do an autopsy. It is very difficult to find a pathologist who will do a private autopsy. Maybe as we have this growth in the valley, that will change. But I've had many people request that and had just really a tough time finding a pathologist who will do that. There used to be a doctor at St. Al's, and she has moved out of the area, but she would do it. There are private autopsy companies that can come from out of state, come in and do it. I have tried to make that work and I really haven't had much luck with it, and it's very, very expensive to do so. And that's probably why it hasn't happened, is it wasn't cost effective for the family. The coroner they only would perform an autopsy if, the death occurred from an accident or something suspicious. But like in the case of your parents, we could try, but wouldn't have been able to get somebody to perform that.
Right.
Yeah.
But interesting, some of these things go along with what you're talking about pre-planning. And
Yeah.
we did a lot of we had signed up with Accent and had the paperwork and even some blown glass picked out. But it didn't occur to me at that point in time, and that probably would have been the time to do it when we weren't in need.
Yes, and then you can make some plans ahead of time and find I know there have been medical schools that will, the autopsy would just consist of the retrieval of the brain from the decedent and sent to a medical school. I had done that quite a few times with the help of the pathologist from St. Al's, and unfortunately we just don't have that resource any longer. And I've made lots of phone calls and not had any luck, but maybe with our change in our valley, we might get somebody who will do that.
Right.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
We had to bury our granddaughter. She was 19, and we had no idea where to go, of course. And I think it's important, I learned from there, for a family to have a general idea of what to do with deaths. We had recently moved into the community, and we had no idea about what was available, and it was pretty traumatic. So it would be a good idea, I think, for anybody to think of these things way beforehand, if they could, about what happens in situations like that.
Yeah. And, with the death of a child and something that happens unexpectedly, you don't always have that time to prepare and to check around. And if you just moved to the valley, you probably didn't have a funeral home that you knew about or had any connection with. And we recommend you go and talk to different mortuaries and see who you have a good feel for, and do some research that way, or ask your friends and neighbors who they have maybe worked with and who they would recommend. I always say that's the best form of advertising, is hearing from somebody who has used my services and would recommend us. So, yeah.
And that would be me.
That would be Dee. It was many, many years ago. We met at a caregivers conference, and we've worked together a lot since then.
We definitely have. Yeah, we definitely have. We have been doing the advanced directive training earlier this month. And one of the things that we talk about is that really an advanced directive should be created when you become adult. When you turn 18, you're an adult. And it's kind of interesting because you don't think about this other piece of that when we're so young. Of course, we like to live in denial in our society. And so that's another interesting thought, is that there does need to be some conversation about what that should look like and how you manage that.
And part of that advanced directive is the durable power of attorney for healthcare, which is so important. Just recently met with a younger person, passed away in her 40s, did not have a husband, but had a long time significant other. Well, he was not her durable power of attorney for healthcare, and he had no rights to make for her disposition. And we had to reach out to other family members that had been estranged from her for a long time. So had she had that, it would have simplified the process.
So
Well,
that's interesting, Danette, because, excuse me, just one second, because the Idaho State Code does allow for, there's the 8 or 9 different alternatives
Yes.
if someone doesn't have one. And I have stepped in any number of times as just an invested party to be able to help someone, but that didn't work that way for funeral arrangements or disposition arrangements.
Nope. The first person is, if you on that list in the Idaho Code, is the person who prepaid arrangements. Then second is if they had something in writing, it's a specific document, which in my 24 years, I've never seen that document. The surviving spouse, then it goes to the children, parents, majority of the parents, siblings, the person who would be to inherit from them. It goes down, and guardian is down towards the bottom, but all those other people are ahead of the guardian. And if the only person who is there is a guardian, we have to wait, I believe, 45 days before disposition can take place. Guardian to approve it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's definitely an interesting piece. Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, those of us who are in the elder care services industry, we even find ourselves surprised with personal losses that weren't planned. And my family had an unexpected loss that really motivated lots of change in how we think and talk about these items. And, as Dee mentioned, it's important to have that healthcare power of attorney as soon as you're 18 years old. And people joke when they hear me talk now, because we talk about this all the time, and they say, oh my gosh, is this dinner table conversation? And I'm like, absolutely. Why, why don't you talk about this over dinner? And one of my favorite conversations was with my then 18-year-old son. And he was part of this family tragedy, having lost his grandmother, and the crisis that ensued for the family of having to make these decisions so quickly. And so he was going to college, and I made sure that we had the healthcare power of attorney completed. And I said, so while we're at it, we've never had this conversation. God forbid something happened to you. What would you want? And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, would you want to be cremated, or would you want to be buried, or would you want something else? And he said, there are other options. And I said, well, there are. And so we started talking about some of them. And I had just read about somewhere a private space company that for a very large sum of money will take your cremated remains into space. So my son is a scientist at heart and studying science, and he goes, oh, that's what I want. I said, I'm happy to put that down as your first choice. Can we have an affordable backup? Just but we had a really great conversation, and it doesn't have to be because you're sick today. It's just about living in choices and knowing what somebody wants.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping to hop him a ride. If I'm alive, I hope I can hop him a ride on a spaceship. But
when a few years ago, my husband and I finally did our wills, and the attorney said, now, do you want to be cremated or buried? And my husband just right away pops up, well, we'll be cremated. And my eyes filled with tears, and they were running down my face. And he looked at me, he goes, what is wrong with you? And I said, well, I'm not sure I want to be cremated. He goes, what do you mean? And why are you so emotional? And the attorney said, I think I'll step out and let you two visit about this. And I thought, we're both morticians. And I guess for myself, I really had not
thought about it.
He obviously had, and him, so we had a good conversation, and now we're all on the same page, but he just looked at me like, what is wrong? I don't know.
Well, it's a very personal decision, and just because that's what you do for a living, you have to think about it in terms of what do I want. And I told my son, and I said, and you have the right to change your mind at any time. Right.
Yeah. I worked with a family that I go to church with, and her husband died kind of unexpectedly. And she had been to 2 seminars that I had given. They had never proceeded to take care of their arrangements. And now he has passed. And I think every person that came to that funeral service, she told them, you need to get your arrangements done. You need to follow through on this. And I wish we had done it. And yeah, it's easy. It's something very easy to put to the side and not really think about.
Well, and so much of it is cultural. That in our culture, there's many other cultures where they do talk about death and they do have other rituals. And I'm glad that came up, because that was one of my other questions. Have you seen new rituals evolve during this pandemic? I mean, true, we might not be getting together, true, we can meet on Zoom or not, but we tend to have one kind of thought, which is either a funeral and then a little celebration, or a little, get together afterwards, or maybe a celebration of life. I think I hear that a lot these days. But have you seen any new rituals kind of evolve?
Boy, nothing that is coming, right to mind, something that we've done like in lieu of a funeral, or I've maybe seen in the last year more people choosing keepsake items because a funeral's not happening. So, here is a keepsake for grandma or grandpa, whether it's the thumbprint jewelry, or we've done more of the glass pieces. And but I can't, nothing else is coming to mind that I know that the streaming of services and giving families members outside of the area or who were not able to travel because of COVID, that opportunity. I did have a family that we had a visitation, and they carried around their laptop and they turned it to every person who came in and said, oh, this is Dee, the next door neighbor. And they were introducing the person who came into the funeral home to whoever was on the other side of this screen. And so that was kind of interesting, but yeah.
Do you think
this is Brenda again?
Hi.
I know you guys can't see me. I'm sorry. I just don't have my laptop open. So talking about the memorial jewelry or the keepsakes. Something I want to mention is that's something I thought that when I passed and I want to be cremated, and I thought, well, I could have like a little glass hummingbird made for each one of my kids or something. And I mentioned that one day, and my daughter who's in her late 20s, she goes, ew, I don't want something like that with your ashes. So something to think about is maybe ask those people, would you want this? Because I just assumed that my kids would want a keepsake like that. Reaction surprised me.
Absolutely. And I think it's important if your plan is for your remains to be scattered, and you just think your daughter's going to be absolutely okay with taking your remains to such and such area, they very well may not be okay with that. And funeral homes do not scatter remains. So that would be up to the surviving, family members to do that. So I think that is important to make sure. And if you're keeping remains at home, that, if something happens to you, does your surviving family member know that you have your mom's cremated remains in a shoebox at the top shelf of the closet tucked way to the back? That something would need to be done. I'll tell another story. Years ago, our girls were little, and I was looking on Craigslist for backyard toys, play items. And this lady had an online garage sale. And I thought, I'm just going to look through there. And there was an urn from a company that we worked with. I recognized it right away. Very, very expensive, cast bronze, beautiful. And I thought, I bet they have no idea what they have in their possession. So I reached out and explained who I was. And I said, do you realize that is an urn? And I said, it's cast bronze. It probably weighs 30 pounds. And she goes, oh, no, it's just plastic resin. And I said, well, I'd be happy to look at it for you if you wanted to bring it in. And I said, if you turn it over, you can unscrew the base and it's hollow in the middle. And she said, well, I'll talk to my husband. She called me the next day. Someone's in there. I'm like, yeah, that's an urn. And they owned rental property. and somebody moved out in the middle of the night, skipped out on their rent, and they had left that in an outside like storage unit. And so she said, these people are a friend of a friend. And she said, I think I can track them down and make sure this gets back to the proper person. But I'm sure that happens quite often. Yeah, so that's maybe where cemeteries are important for cremated remains, and knowing where your loved one is and a chance to have that memorialization.
I just keep them on my dresser. And as you know, Danette, they're just kind of stacking up.
Did your dad not go to the veteran cemetery?
It was my mom that's going to
Oh,
the
it was your
veteran
mom there.
cemetery,
Okay.
but she's going
States.
into Nevada,
Yeah.
and Dad is the mountains, as is
Okay.
B. And so, they're all just hanging out.
Yeah.
But
Keep it
we
watch
hope
on
to,
you.
we hope to be, yes, they are. It's interesting. I'm comforted by their presence,
Yeah.
and look forward to being able to take them where they'd wanted to be in the near future. So yeah.
Good.
Any other questions or comments? Well, this has been an absolutely informative, delightful session, Danette. Thank you
Good.
so incredibly much for.
You're welcome. My pleasure. And if I've seen a couple of names that there haven't been necessarily any questions, I might just say, if you have a question and you are too embarrassed to ask in front of everybody else, you're always welcome to call me, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have, and we can sure go from there.
And so Danette and her husband own Accent Funeral Home in Meridian, and it's a lovely, lovely small venue there, and just the best service that anybody could ask for. And both in preparation, during, and the follow-up. And I appreciate you both very much, and the service that you provide. And thank you so much for being with us today, Danette.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for asking me to speak.